There we go. So we have a few minutes before we begin Bridges Now with Nick Wagner. We're very grateful for all who are joining us. We hope that you'll sit tight and we'll be ready to begin in just about 15 minutes. There we go. So we have a few minutes before we begin Bridges Now. For those of you who are joining us, those links to the right of your screen lead directly to Team RCIA, which is Nick's site, and our Bridges site. You are welcome to click on those and explore the sites as we prepare for Bridges Now. We'll be ready to start in just about 15 minutes. For those who are joining us live on Google Hangout or on YouTube, we will be ready to begin in just a few moments. Know that we will be recording the session and it will be made available on YouTube very shortly after our time together today. We look forward to having you as part of our conversation. We'll be ready to begin in just about 10 minutes. Again, for those of you who have joined us via Google Hangout, on the right-hand side of the screen are live links to both the Team RCIA site and Catholic Life and Faith's Bridges site. We hope that you'll explore those either now in the time that we have before we begin, or perhaps after our time together today. We'll share with you just a little bit about what both sites are all about as we enjoy conversation with Nick Wagner. We'll begin in just a little over 5 minutes. Thanks. For those of you who are joining us for Bridges Now with Nick Wagner, we'll be beginning in just about 3 minutes. We're very grateful for your presence with us today, and we're looking forward to our conversations together. There's Nick. Good morning or afternoon, depending on which part of the world you might be in. We're going to get started in just about a minute. Okay, well, it is right at the top of the hour, and so let us begin this time for Bridges Now with Nick Wagner. I want to thank all of you who are joining us live and share our welcome with those who will join us through the recordings over time as well. We have some people who have come in directly through Google Hangout. We'll have a couple of times where those of you who are on Google Hangout will be able to offer your thoughts and questions for Nick as we proceed through this time together. Those who are on YouTube, you should know that we'll be sharing contact information so that you'll be able to get a hold of either Nick or I or Stephanie Moore over time. You will be hearing all of this with just a very slight delay, but you'll be actually viewing it as it's being recorded. And so with that, it's wonderful to be able to welcome Nick Wagner for Bridges Now. Nick is a longtime friend. I met him first as when he was an editor and I was a brand new writer, and he was very kind to me in those early moments when I was still figuring out what that life was all about. But he is a respected liturgical leader, particularly with an emphasis in the RCIA, and I'm sure he'll share with us some of the wisdom and insights that he and the team at Team RCIA have gained over the years about the catechumenate and its impact in the life of the parish. And he is also a respected leader in catechesis. And so with all of this wealth of information, it's wonderful to invite Nick to share with us some of his insights about putting first things first, how we really can make the liturgy central, and how in a lot of ways the liturgy is the sort of the operating principle for all of us in our life within our parish communities. And so Nick, if you would, just share some initial thoughts with our folks here about the liturgy and its role in our lives.
Well, thanks, Lisa, for that very warm introduction. You know, you mentioned this is about putting first things first, and that really is the central thing that I've tried to get across in the writing and the the work that I've done. And it it's not something I invented. It flows out of the Second Vatican Council, which the first document published by the Council was the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy. And that was a conscious decision by the Council. There was actually a debate going on whether to publish the Constitution on the Church first. Since we are the Church, we're talking about the Church, shouldn't we define what Church is before we talk about all the things that the Church does? And there was another faction that said, no, we should really talk about the liturgy first, because the liturgy is the first thing that we do. The liturgy is why we're the Church. And so that idea of first things first, it really is the central activity for all of us, no matter what our ministry is. The liturgy is the primary thing that we do as Catholics and as Christians, and it is the action that defines us and shapes our lives as disciples.
Nick, a couple of years ago, Stephanie Moore and I had the privilege of being with you for a week in Saginaw for their annual Formation Institute. And I remember distinctly a workshop that you proposed to the two of us that we would have as part of that week, and it was all about making the liturgy of your dreams. And yet, when we experienced that together, it really was more than that. It was as much about the way in which the liturgy shapes all of us, and the way in which the liturgy is formative, as it was about liturgical enactment. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little of that with our audience, and then I have a follow-up question to that.
Sure. It's really two sides of the same coin. If we think about the liturgy of our dreams, if we think about the high point of liturgies that we've celebrated, like where do we feel most in touch with Jesus? Where do we feel most in touch with the Holy Spirit? Where do we feel most in touch with ourselves? We all have an experience of liturgy like that, and those of us who work in church ministry, whether it's liturgy or not, a lot of us, our hope, our effort is to have that happen again, to get back to that liturgy of our dreams. And it's not just because it's such wonderful, uplifting liturgy, but it is because, as you said, Lisa, it's formative. And it's not formative of just our individual selves, but it's formative of the whole community. And when we engage in formation ministries, youth ministry or catechesis or children's religious education or Catholic schools or any of our formation ministries, we have to keep in mind that it's no matter how wonderful our formation ministries are, the primary place of formation is the Sunday liturgy. And if we're not attending to the liturgy of our dreams, if we're not making that Sunday liturgy the best experience possible, then our formation efforts are hindered somewhat. And so that's kind of the biggest thing. I think it's a struggle sometimes for folks who are not naturally gifted in liturgy, because they think, well, I don't have any influence over that. That's Father's job or the musician's job or something like that. And we really have to give ourselves permission to have influence over the Sunday liturgy and provide input into how the Sunday liturgy happens if we're engaged in any kind of formation ministry at all, because of its huge influence and power over how it shapes us.
And Nick, that was actually what my follow-up question was going to be. I know that many of the people who are with us and who likely will view this in the future are not directly responsible for the liturgy. They're catechists and catechetical leaders, perhaps some stewardship leaders and folks who really have responsibility for evangelization processes. And yet, the liturgy really is about and needs to have some influence by all of us. In your experience, how does that happen in parishes, and what might be some tips for those who have never thought to ever talk about the liturgy with their pastor or the music director?
Yeah, well, the first pastor that I worked for when I was a baby liturgist, he had a really great image. We were trying to form a liturgy committee in that parish, and we were going back and forth over what the responsibilities of the liturgy committee were. And these folks that we were going to invite onto the committee were just like any liturgy committee you might assemble in your parish. It was volunteers, folks who cared about the liturgy but didn't have any really deep training in liturgical structure, liturgical history, or liturgical theology, just folks. So, and the pastor's question to me was, do we expect that these folks are going to kind of guide how the liturgy happens when they really don't have the expertise to do that? And so even though they were on the liturgy committee, I think they were a little bit in the same boat as the folks you described, Lisa, where if we're in catechetical ministries or whatever other ministries, we may not feel we have any influence over the liturgy. So the pastor said to me, I think of committees like this as, like he said, I had surgery last year, and I had, the surgeons gave me their best opinions. They told me what was going to happen. I even had a couple of options. But at the end of the day, it was the surgeons who decided how the surgery was going to go. And my job was to evaluate the surgery. My job was to ask afterwards, did I get better? And so folks who are wanting to influence the liturgy, it's somewhat like that. It's somewhat mystagogical. It's somewhat after the fact, not after the fact exactly, but as a participant in the liturgy, was it the liturgy of my dreams? Did it accomplish everything that liturgy folks promised would happen? Did we praise God? Did it change hearts? Did it convert people? And those are all evaluative questions that any Christian can ask, and it doesn't have to be restricted to just those with liturgical expertise.
Yeah. And I think part of what we experienced in Saginaw with the formation people who were there, they were all catechetical leaders. I think we had one pastor in the room. One of the insights that I still recall very powerfully was this aha moment when I think everyone in the room said, wait a minute, that is a common responsibility that all of us have together. Yeah. And even perhaps more so from the catechetical perspective, not only to do that individual internal spiritual reflection, but then also to think about how might we lead the assembly into that same sort of reflection, preparation, and mystagogical reflection after the liturgy has taken place.
Yeah, the assembly is a huge group to take into account, because if you think about, I don't know what happens in your Sunday Mass, but at Sunday Masses I go to, after about the fourth pew, the interest level starts to drop off and the participation level starts to drop off, and those are all things that really like to ramp up the participation and get people more involved directly during Sunday. Those are perhaps things that are more the responsibility of the liturgical leaders of the parish, but the folks who are not the liturgical leaders can be giving feedback, like to the musicians, for example. The musicians, for a lot of musicians, the music sounds great because they're hearing the folks in the first three pews, first three rows, singing their hearts out. But unless you're consciously trying to find out if folks are singing, in the back of the church, the musicians aren't going to know how well the music is, and that's where some of us non-liturgical folks can be more helpful by giving feedback to the musicians. Now, I'm a big fan of giving people positive feedback. So when the music isn't working, you're not going to, I don't think, going to have a lot of success going up to your musician and saying, well, that song was awful, don't do that again. But if, on the other hand, a song really works, and you really, like your catechumens are singing, or your children are singing, or the youth in the parish sing their hearts out when you do that song, if I guarantee, right after Mass, if you go up and give your musician a giant hug and say, that was great, you really helped me do my ministry with that song, because now I can catechize because you've given me tools to work with. Do that again. Then you're going to hear that song a lot more, and the musician will get the idea that they're in partnership with you in this ministry.
Amen. So with that, Nick, you had a question that you wanted to ask our participants, and I think we've got about 25 or so who are actually on live with us on Google Hangout. And so those who are on Google Hangout, on the right of your screen now, you should see a place where you can ask questions, but specifically right now, Nick's going to ask you a question, and you'll be able to post your thoughts right here for all of us to share. I'll be monitoring that sidebar throughout our time together. So Nick, pose your question, and then we'll see if we can't get some conversation going.
Well, the question is a simple one. It is what are your two biggest concerns about liturgy? And I know we've got folks from all over the country and all over different ministries and stuff. So to try to give a focus to who's actually here and what the actual needs are, if you could just share that with us, I'd be really grateful. What are your two biggest concerns about liturgy? And they can be the two biggest concerns about liturgy in your particular ministry, or they can be about your personal spirituality. But just share with us, your two biggest concerns. What are those that you have?
Thank you. So those of you who are live with us, please do us a favor and share your concerns. We do have people, at least those who registered, from throughout the United States and Canada. I know we have some people from other parts of the world who are planning to take this in at other times, but we know that what you share will be representative of what everybody out there is wondering and thinking and concerned about. So if you would please share your thoughts, those questions or concerns that you have. And Nick, as we wait for people perhaps to think about that and share about that a little bit, I'm wondering, why is it that the things that we do at Mass matter so deeply? From your perspective, could you offer a little thought about that?
Well, if you think about what Mass is, a lot of us think of kind of the Last Supper. People will refer to that sometimes as the first Mass or the institution of the Mass, and the Last Supper really doesn't look anything like what we do in Mass now, but there are elements of what happened at the Last Supper that are core to our Christian experience and our Christian celebration of Mass, and primarily it's that moment when Jesus took the bread and broke it and shared it, and took the cup and blessed it and shared it, and the words, the action and the words. He said, when you want to remember me, do this, and it's this that's so important. It's and the memory, the word that he uses there. Well, he's not speaking in Greek, but the word that shows up in the Gospels are in Greek, and so the word that the Greek writers of the Gospels use for that memory of me, the word for that is anamnesis, and that's the opposite of amnesia. So anamnesis is a memory that is not just recalling the past, but it's kind of making present the whole reality of this experience. And so when we want to anamnesis, when we want to memorialize, when we want to remember Jesus in the fullest sense, where Jesus is actually present to us, it is that remembering that is so important, and that's the core of what we do in the liturgy. And so when we talk about the liturgy being formative, it's not formative in the sense of like when you go to math class and you learn how to do geometry and you've got to really struggle to get all of that. I did anyway, have to really struggle to get all that in your head, and at the end of the day you come out of it and you're not really a mathematician. You just sort of made a swipe at it. But it's not formative in that way. It's formative in the sense of when you fall in love. When you fall in love with someone, you're changed forever, and that person's life has so impacted you that you become a different person because of that. And it's that kind of memorial or memory or anamnesis, that encounter with Christ in the liturgy, the encounter with the beloved, so changes us that it makes us more and more like Christ each time we encounter Christ in that real presence kind of way. And that formation then spills out into the world. As we're sent forth from the Mass, we become, St. Paul says, other Christs out in the world. And the more and more we can reflect Christ out in the world, then it changes how the world operates, how the world works.
And so with that, and we I think sometimes maybe we forget. The memory works in the opposite way. Maybe we just become dull sometimes to all of this, and then it does lack that power, that potential to really shape us. Joyce Donahue shares her question or her concern is tired older ministers or ministry leaders who lack inspiration, and so often things are rather minimal. When I hear what you just said, and yet I know that Joyce's concern probably is echoed by dozens of people throughout the Northern Hemisphere, what kinds of clues might you give us to counteract that sort of minimalistic
And I would say it's not just tired older ministers, but it's sometimes disaffected youth, and it's people who are in a bad mood that day, and there's all kinds of human distractions that get in our way. And so the challenge for pastoral leaders is to look at our toolkit. What kinds of things do we use to renew people's spirituality? And catechists and youth ministers have lots and lots of tools with which they can do this. Retreats is a big one. I think that anybody who signs up for a liturgical ministry, there are two kinds of liturgical ministers in my experience. There's the kind who sign up, kind of intending to put in the minimum, kind of, as out of the largesse of their heart, they're going to help Father out, or they're going to give their 10 minutes to be a lector on Sunday or something, and don't bother me with doing anything else because I've given my time already. And then there are people who see it as a real ministry, who see that they're not Christ in a particular way in this community, and their goal is to continually to do that more and more effectively by their presence in the assembly, by the way they pray and sing in the assembly, by the way they greet strangers in the assembly, that their ministry extends beyond the few minutes that they're kind of on for that day. And the way to sort these folks out is through something like retreats or reflection days or training days where we increase the level of commitment that's required. As I did this when I was a parish leader, I was always so scared to ask people to give more time or give more effort because, I wasn't paying them and it's all volunteer. And again, this same pastor that I worked with, he said, it's by calling people to that higher level, you're calling them to their best selves. And you're calling those who have a true vocation to this ministry to live it out, and they're actually looking for that. They're looking for a higher bar to reach, so they know what's expected. And after he kind of told me that, I tried that out. We had a lector in the parish who was pretty good, but he was one of these guys. He would just put in his time, and he would come to a training day once in a while, but it just was clear that he kind of read the readings that Sunday on the way to church, and he could deliver them pretty well, but and he was always a little upset with me because I would never schedule him for the big liturgies like Christmas or Easter Vigil, and he said that to me one day. And I'll call him John. His name wasn't John, but he asked me why that was. I said, John, well, you're a good lector, but you're not the best lector we have in the parish. And at the big events like that, we have a lot of strangers coming, a lot of folks who don't know Christ, and they really need to have the best lector. I said, I think you have it within you to be one of our best lectors, but you're going to have to show me that you really want to come up to that level. Well, man, he turned around 180 degrees. He really did become, I think, the best lector in the parish after that, and it was because I raised the bar and called him to that higher level. Another thing we fear sometimes is we can't fire volunteers I don't call it firing, but ask them into another ministry where they might feel more fulfilled and more excited. And that creates an opening for folks who might have more excitement for that ministry. Another thing, the question Joyce had too is, I get this all the time, that the older folks feel like they put in their time. I asked an older guy once to be a community minister. He said, no, I've already done my time. And I didn't say this to him, but I figured, well, you're not dead yet, so you haven't done all your time, or the Holy Spirit would have brought you home. And so that's another thing. No matter what people's individual circumstances are, we want to gently challenge them to pick up their cross, the cross they promised to carry at baptism. And really serving in the liturgy is no huge cross like some other ministries that folks get involved in. And so they're there anyway. So to call them to deep compassionate ministry in the liturgy, I think, is a responsibility that we have as leaders, and to provide them, use our toolkit, provide them with the tools and the support that they need in order to fulfill that ministry effectively.
Amen. And Nick, I just want to echo what you said. Stephanie Moore and I have been working on this Bridges project, and we have not had a chance yet to talk about this, but one of the things that we've been talking with people about is servant leadership. I actually had the privilege of being at Stephanie's parish with a gathering of liturgical ministers and those who are in various forms of leadership, committees and commissions and councils and so on. And the overriding response at the end of the day was, we need more of this. You know, this is good for us, and it's going to make a difference in the life of the community. And that really is what the whole Bridges thing is about. We'll tell people about that later. Just two comments quickly. Those who maybe are looking for the comment bar, there's a question icon in the upper right-hand side of your screen. If you click on that, then you'll see the place where you can offer your thoughts and your concerns. Another one from Joyce, she says, when presiders won't connect with the liturgy planners, it makes it difficult to prepare or plan in a coordinated way. Nick, you've really talked about the importance of that. Do you have any suggestions for sort of bringing people along to a more shared responsibility model for the liturgy and everything else, really?
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on in that question. I get the most questions I get about liturgy have to do with the ordained, and it's understandable because they are so central and so important to what happens in the liturgy. But as we all know, if a parish priest has huge responsibilities that extend way beyond the liturgy, and oftentimes, especially nowadays, more so than when I was actively involved as a professional liturgist, it's just a matter of time. There are fewer priests in most parishes. They have many more responsibilities. In lots of areas of the country, the numbers of Catholics are increasing, so the flocks are getting bigger, the pastors are getting smaller. And so it's not always the case that the pastor doesn't want to connect with the liturgy committee or the planners, but just may not physically be able to because of time. So now there are also a few, I think there are very few priests, particularly pastors, who just don't want to be bothered. They don't feel like, you know, the folks on the liturgy planning teams really have the expertise or really going to provide anything valuable, and so they're kind of dismissive of that. In my experience, those folks are rare. They exist, of course, and we hear about them more because they're more painful to us. But we don't really hear about the heroes and the good guys as much. So you have to discern which of those characters you're dealing with. You're dealing with somebody who really cares but is too busy, or you're dealing with somebody who doesn't seem to care because of whatever personality things that person has. For folks who care but are too busy, then I think, again, we can treat the liturgy kind of mystagogically. We can come at it through an evaluative sense. Like we can sort of provide a regular process for giving feedback to the presiders and the homilists about how they're doing. And again, I would do that from a positive point of view. I remember one time we had a parish that I was a volunteer in, and I was helping with the catechumenate. And the pastor got sick, and he was like bedridden and couldn't really function at all for quite a long time. The associate pastor, newly ordained, he was an older guy, so he had some life experience, but he really had never run a parish. He didn't have a lot of experience in preaching and presiding, and honestly, his homilies were not yet up to the level that I think even he hoped they would be. They were quite boring a lot of the time. And I had to work with the catechumens. We get dismissed, after the homily, and we go over to the room we're in, and I ask them, what did you think? And they're just like a little bit dazed because of how hard the homily was for them to absorb. And then one day, that priest, he told a story from his previous life, from his career before he was a priest, and how he really screwed up in that career. He really made a big mistake. And it showed him, he really thought he was kind of invincible before that in his career, and it showed him how vulnerable he was. And that process, that little crack of vulnerability, led to his questioning about his choice of vocation, and eventually led to his becoming a priest. And he was telling all this story like from his heart, like his conversion story. And everybody in the church was on the edge of their pews, and after we were dismissed, the catechumens couldn't stop talking about it. They really keyed into that. So I had never said a word to this guy about his homilies, because I knew he was taking on all the responsibility of this parish with really no training and I knew, one more negative word, it could be the straw that. But when he gave that homily, I called him up right away. I got his voicemail because it was still Sunday, he was still working, but I called him up as soon as we were done with our catechumenate session, and I praised the heck out of him. I told him what I liked about the homily. I told him what the catechumens liked about the homily. I told him why the homily helped us do our ministry so well, and how his conversion story was an example to the catechumens of their own conversion, and so on and so on. Well, Matt, next week we got another story. So it's if we can find stuff that the priests are doing, that the presiders are doing, that works, and affirm that in an evaluative sense, in a positive evaluation, then that's going to go a long way towards improving the liturgy. Now, if you've got the guys who really don't want input, I think it'll even work with them. I mean, there's no priest gets into this ministry because he's a bad guy. All priests get into this ministry because they love Jesus, they want to serve the Lord, and if you express to them how they shaped you and moved you and brought you to deeper faith because of the way they presided or the way they preached, you'll get more of that. You'll get more of that behavior. It'll be a long process. I know we all want the magic wand where we say, if you just stop doing that and start doing this, everything will be fine. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in our families. It doesn't work with our children, and it's certainly not going to work with our pastors.
Well, and I think something else that you sort of alluded to there is the whole role of liturgical catechesis, and the story that was coming to mind as you were telling the story of the priest and the homily was one time in the midst of a family formation night, one of our last year's catechumens showed the videotape of his baptism to a group of junior high kids. And one of the kids just sort of blurted out, "I'll never look at the font in the same way again."
Yeah.
And, and we wanted to scream. That was the whole idea of this. But in the midst of the way in which we fashion the liturgy and carry the liturgy out, there's this whole other element that I think we sometimes miss of just helping people to understand what's going on and really have that aha moment of, oh my gosh, wait a minute, if that's what it is, I'll never look at it the same way again.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm wondering, one of the things that you and I and Stephanie talked about as we were preparing for the week in Saginaw was just the importance of the liturgy in drawing people to that love of Jesus Christ. And I'm wondering, what is it that you think we should be aware of as we think about the potential for the liturgy to evangelize, perhaps those who are really seeking a deeper relationship with Christ and with the community?
Yeah. Well, the liturgy as a whole, I mean, the whole event of the liturgy, this is where we differ, Catholics differ a little bit from some of our Protestant brothers and sisters. The liturgy itself is not primarily a tool for evangelization. It is a community. It is a gathering of the baptized, of the faithful, to praise and worship God. And so there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of to the outsider, it looks like secret handshakes and code language and why are they up and down all the time and all that somewhat confusing things. But if you think about anything else, if you have a gathering of dietitians, for example, if I showed up at that gathering, I'd be completely lost. I know nothing about dietary science, and I have a good friend who's an expert in it. She speaks at these things, and once in a while she'll tell me like what she spoke about, and I'm lost from the second sentence, So it's not really evangelization in that sense. Nevertheless, especially with Pope Francis being so prominent in calling people, through his wonderful ministry, folks are showing up at our door, and because they know that something happens in that building there, something happens with those people there, and they want some of that. And so we'll get lots of visitors on Sunday. Even in our smallest parishes, we'll get visitors on any given Sunday. The huge question for me is, do those folks get welcomed? Now, almost every parish I'm in, when I do workshops, the folks there will tell me that parish that I'm standing in is the most welcoming parish in the entire diocese. and this doesn't always happen, but once in a while there'll be somebody new in the parish that will kind of timidly raise their hand in the back and say, you know, I've been here for a year, and this meeting is the first time anyone has talked to me. You know, and that people are shocked. You know, but that happens every Sunday, and so we want to ask ourselves, as both as pastoral leaders and those we minister with, are we all kind of focused on the back door? Are we paying attention to who's walking in, or even who's sitting right next to us? And are we introducing ourselves to strangers? Are we welcoming those folks in? There's been some research done on folks who go out seeking new parishes, and folks, newcomers who come to a parish. One thing they'll evaluate the parish on right away is how well they're welcomed at the door. And again, a lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters, they excel at this. You know, they do this really well. And Catholic churches, depends on the church, depends on the diocese, but for the most part, we kind of fail at that. And so we can always do better. But the biggest place to exhibit hospitality is not so much at the beginning of the liturgy, but at the end of the liturgy. And so what seekers will comment on to pollsters is they'll evaluate the liturgy on did anybody come up and talk to them after the liturgy ended. And then if that happens 3 times in a row, there's pretty much kind of scientific documentation here. If that seeker gets talked to at the end of the liturgy, they're likely to come back the next Sunday. And if they get talked to at the end of the liturgy again, and if that happens 3 times in a row, you can almost count on that person joining the parish. So it's really, you know, it seems simple, but a lot of us, we come to church to pray, or we come to church to have our 1 hour with God. Maybe not so much those of us on the call here, but those folks we work with, maybe that's still, you know, kind of the mindset. And we have to really think about who's showing up here and how much are we incorporating them into our community. How much are we welcoming them? How much are we talking to them?
Thank you for that, Nick, and I agree so much. And again, you know, our experience with Bridges, we've been talking with people, and primarily leaders, you know, the people who are in parish leadership, not only the staff, but parishioners, and we've been talking with them about building bridges, you know, that it is our responsibility, but it's something that we don't recognize until we really stop and think about it. And I love the sort of research-based evidence that you're giving us, because it gives us that much more reason to really stop and think about the ways in which we can reach out to people at all stages of the life of faith. But
yeah, and the other thing about one more thing I want to add about that, Lisa, if your liturgy is horrible, it doesn't matter. That's that for the seeker. It's that personal connection. And if they have that, they'll show up even though the liturgy is horrible, even though they don't understand it, even though nobody in the back row is singing. If they get that personal connection, that's what's key for the seeker.
I always remember a young man who I had the privilege of coordinating the catechumenate process in my parish for about 10 years. And one of the young men that I remember vividly was the son of an evangelical preacher, and had gone through a stage in his life where he thought maybe he was going to follow in his dad's footsteps, and then had gotten a college degree, was working, and a friend of his invited him to come to Easter Sunday Mass. Now, that's kind of like the last time that I would invite somebody to come would be Easter Sunday, just because we know what happens on Easter Sunday at Masses. And it happened that his friend didn't realize kind of what the crazy life is on Easter Sunday morning, so they got there just before Mass began, and they ended up sitting at the very back of the balcony. And this young man said to me later, it was as though everyone knew exactly what was going on. Everyone was moving in chorus up and down and signing themselves. And he said it felt like it was one body. And
Wow.
and that was one of the things that really struck him and urged him to come back. But it was the friends after Mass stopping and talking and greeting him and so on. Well, it turned out the friend had just done a retreat a couple of weeks ago. That was what had pulled him more deeply in, and so that ripple had begun. You know, but we don't think sometimes about the importance of that personal connection.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And Debbie Aker, Debbie from the Diocese of Antigonish in Nova Scotia says a sense of belonging is so important.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to encourage those who are with us, if you have now questions or comments, please include those in that sidebar as we continue to talk with Nick. And Nick, I'm wondering if maybe, and we did not talk about doing this at all, so this is going to be totally off the cuff, but you know, it's the season of Lent. We're not that far away from the sacraments of initiation at the Vigil. I'm wondering if you could just maybe share with people just a little of what you're about with Team RCIA, and from your perspective, the importance of the catechumenate in the life of the parish community.
Yeah. Well, this is the catechumenate. The struggle for me is to always talk about, again, like liturgy, the catechumenate is the primary thing that we do, and in so many places it's just another ministry, and so we have to kind of reform our thinking about this all the way back to Pope Paul VI in his document on evangelization. He wrote that the reason the church exists is for evangelization. And every pope after that has echoed that and expanded on that, and culminating, I think, with Pope Francis's document, The Joy of the Gospel. In that document and in his ministry and in the way he's being pope, he's making it clear that the reason the church exists is to reach out, kind of as Debbie said, to those who don't have a home, to those who don't feel like they belong, for whatever reason, because they're ill, or because they're old, or because they're poor, or because they don't fit into society in some way, they don't feel like they belong, and we should be the people, we should be the place where anybody can come and feel like they belong. And at the core, that's what catechumenate ministry is about. It's not primarily about making Catholics, although that's an outcome. But the primary thing is to go out and reach out to those who have no home and welcome them home, welcome them in. You know, when you think about that, that's really our baptismal promise. For when we get baptized, we promise to follow the cross of Christ, to do what Jesus did. And that was, if all of the gospel stories tell us, that's what Jesus did. He would cross over boundaries. He crossed out of Judea into Samaria. He crossed out of the polite society into the homes of sinners and tax collectors. He crossed out of the kind of safe, hygienic places into where the sick were without any fear, so that he could welcome those people home, welcome them into the reign and love of God. And so catechumenate ministry is primarily about that. So a lot of what we do at Team RCI is help folks expand their thinking about these being, you know, kind of Catholic classes, and really a bigger, more profound ministry of reaching out to seekers and drawing seekers in. And when you think about it that way, it completely changes your understanding of what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. The first thing that sets in when I make that clear to folks is panic, because then, you know, that means that my structure, my neat little structure that begins on this date every year and ends on this date every year, and it only takes 6 of us to do it, you know, then it starts to, you know, immediately that starts to fall apart. But that's a good thing, you know. Again, it's like falling in love. You had your neat little life all set up, and then you met the one, and everything's different. You know, you got to move where the pictures are and change the color of paint on the wall and the kinds of entertainment that you go to. You know, life changes. It's that way when we encounter seekers. Every seeker that we encounter totally disrupts whatever we thought we had planned. The Holy Spirit has other plans, and that makes parishes different. It makes parishes into what we really are, instead of kind of spiritual social clubs or you know, Sunday only kind of Catholics, but really creates a ministry for the parish and the parish that can have an impact on the world.
And so, Nick, someone from St. Joseph Catholic Church has offered a question in response to your insights about the importance of welcoming and hospitality, and I just want to share this because it's all connected. So then, how do we implement strategies and tactics to improve our welcoming and hospitality? This particular parish has created a host team, as suggested in Rebuild, to address this with our ushers and greeters ministry, but even changing the paradigm within this group is challenging. I have a few thoughts, but I'm wondering what you're thinking about that.
Well, I'd say, again, try to catch people doing stuff right. So when you see an usher, welcoming a stranger, walk up to him and give him a hug, And then also, I would not, I think ushers, and they kind of sign up for that ministry for particular reasons, and we have to go with where their strengths are. Oftentimes, their strengths are not welcoming the stranger, and so we have to look around and say, who in the parish, who's the person in the parish who, if they're at Starbucks waiting in line for their latte, by the time their latte gets served, they'd become best friends with the 2 people in front of them, the 3 behind them, and all the baristas, Everybody knows who that is in the parish. Go find 3 or 4 of those people and make sure, make them the host committee. Make them the folks who are, maybe we ask them to come to 2 masses on Sunday and where they can do their greeting skills. And maybe they don't stay for the whole second mass, but they're there at the beginning to really do some welcoming. And they start training other people in that. And even shy people can be taught. I'm basically shy. I'm sort of an introvert, but anytime I'm at mass, I have to force myself out of my skin, but I do, and I go and shake hands. I talk to people. I introduce myself to people, and we can train folks to do that. I also like to think in like setting up short-term plans. So how are we going to? If our goal is really to have say more, what if we wanted to have, say, 10 significant interactions with strangers on Sunday? How would we measure that? And then how would we track that over, say, 30 days to really, have a checklist and say we had 10 every Sunday for a month? And then we want to improve that. We want to extend that for 90 days, or we want to increase the number. We want to have 20 significant interactions or something like that. But I really believe in measurement, because when we say we're the most welcoming parish in the diocese, how are we measuring that? Are we really keeping track of where we've had these welcoming interactions? Are we simply basing that on how friendly everyone was at the meeting where we decided that we're the most welcoming parish in the diocese?
Right.
We're all going to be welcoming to our friends. How are we measuring welcome to the strangers? If we get really clinical is kind of a weird word, but get some way of actually saying, are folks talking to strangers? Are we encountering people after Mass? Are folks actually, when people sign up to join the parish, do we have some way of asking them why they're joining it? Are they joining because they're Catholics and they just moved in the neighborhood, or somebody invited them to join? What's the reason? There are all kinds of ways we can measure.
And Nick, I was going to actually echo something that you said. My first thought was, instead of filling the role, find the person with the talent, which is exactly what you said. In my own parish, we made a distinct shift when we started thinking about the people at the perimeter, so the people at the doors and the people in the gathering space really having a different role than the ushers who were inside the worship space. And therefore those who had offered their service year upon year as ushers, they could continue as ushers, and there's a place for that. But there were other people who had other talents who, could serve as ministers of hospitality. That made a big difference, and it actually doubled the amount of people that we had who were being attentive to the folks who were there.
I went to one of those big evangelical, televangelist kind of churches one Sunday just to see what they do, kind of thing, and it happened to be raining that Sunday, and it's huge, right? It's a mega church, and so I'm like the person who shows up like right on time or a little late, so all the parking spaces were way in the back of the parking lot, like seemed like 3 blocks away from the church, and it was raining that day, and I barely had my door open, and there was a greeter from that church there with an umbrella to walk me to, so I wouldn't get wet. And of course, he's evangelizing me all the way up to the church.
All the way to the door.
You know, we think of the greeting job as starting once people are in the door, but they had, like you said, the perimeters. They had all the way out on the far edge of the parking lot. They had people to greet and welcome. Another parish that I went to, this was a Lutheran parish, and I walked into the church, and I was trying to be anonymous. You know, I didn't want to have my Catholic credentials showing too much, so I'm trying to kind of sneak in. So I kind of go in the side. You know how there's 3 doors across the front. Sometimes I go in that one on the far right and trying to get in there. And the usher walked over. He was in the center door. He walked all the way over from there, saw me, grabbed my arm, and handed me a hymnal with the hymn open to the first song and welcomed me to the parish. And when that moment that he had me grabbed there, the pastor noticed. And so he comes walking over to introduce himself to me and all that. You know, so it's just it's not hard stuff, but it's intentional. We have to be intentional about it.
Yeah. So, Nick, we've got just a few minutes remaining. I want to give you an opportunity to share with people a resource that you've created that you're offering people free on the Team RCIA site. And then I want to make just a couple of connections to Bridges. But first, would you take a moment and just share a little bit about Team RCIA and particularly about this resource?
Let's see if I can get it up here.
I was able to get it on that right-hand column again. I actually was able to get the link there. It says the Beginner's Guide to Making Mass Matter, and our viewers can click on that. When I post the recording link on the Bridges site, I'll include the link. But why don't you tell people just a little bit about that and why you have created this?
Yeah, and I'm still working to bring it up here. All of a sudden, my site doesn't want to work. But it is it's a free guide to making Mass matter to folks who what do I want to say? You know, somebody, I think it was Joyce, asked the question about what about folks who are disaffected? How do we help them out? And the answer to that is to do some things that some simple things that really make a difference to people. And there are 4 big ideas that I have in this. This is a PDF download and it's free for everybody. But there are 4 big ideas I have in there that you don't have to be a liturgist to implement. And a real simple one is to just get in touch with the power of the Holy Spirit that's in all of our lives. What is the reason that we go to Mass? What is the reason that the liturgy matters to us? And get in touch with that and start telling that story every time we gather together for whatever reason. Gather for family dinners, or gather for the choir practice, or gather for our youth retreat, or gather for the parent meeting for First Communion preparation. We start telling that story about why the Holy Spirit has moved me to make Mass such a priority in my life. It begins to make things matter to everyone else in the parish. So that's just one idea of some of what's in there. And everybody can get that if you go to teamrci.com/mass-guide, mass guide with a hyphen in between. Then you can click there and you can download that.
Nick, thank you. And now you need to unshare your screen.
Okay.
We never quite got to see the page, but you can see it over there on the right-hand column. And Nick, I thank you not only for sharing a little about the resource, but thank you for the resource. I just know how important this is for people, and particularly for those who are leaders in their parishes. I want to share with folks just a real quick glimpse into the Bridges process, because it is connected. And Nick, I don't even know that I realized just how it was connected with what you've been sharing today. But it really is about that, how we within our parishes build those circles of welcome and build those bridges to those who are not in a place where they feel that they belong right now. And in fact, one of the things that we've been sharing with people is 3 initial bridges that we believe that parishes and people can build, and those are welcome, friendship, and sharing. And so it's very much connected to what we've been talking about today. At bridgetofaith.net, you can explore all of that, including our very first module, which is now available online. It's all downloadable. It includes videos as well as workbooks to help people to really begin to explore, particularly Pope Francis's vision of the evangelizing community. And so our first module is on that, and then we'll continue to offer additional modules as it develops. Nick, I want to thank you for all of what you've shared with us today. I'm wondering if you have just a couple of final thoughts before we conclude our time together.
I guess I'd say if you want to know more about particularly how the catechumenate plays into all this, the main site, teamrca.com, there's a ton of free resources there to help folks who are either in catechumenate ministry or want to know more about catechumenate ministry. The second thing that I just as a goodbye that I'd like to share is, I haven't met everybody that's online here, but I've talked with in forums like this before, and I do workshops across the country, so I meet lots and lots of folks who are in parish leadership, and I know the really difficult, hard, sometimes thankless work that you all are doing to make Christ real in people's lives. And so I want to thank you for doing that, because it really is the work of folks like you in the trenches, day by day, doing all of this, that is going to change the world. It's going to make the world different. I really believe that. That's why I'm in this ministry. I know that's why you are, Lisa. And I believe that's why all of the folks on this call are signing up to do this really difficult, hard work. So God bless you. Keep it up.
Amen. And thank you, Nick, for your time today. Thanks to all who have been with us live. We will post the recording of this session on the Bridges site right by where you registered earlier this week. And our next Bridges Live will be held in April. And our guests will be Father Gary Lazzaroni and Larry Cardoniga from St. Joseph's in Vancouver, Washington. They have some wonderful experiences to share with us, and I just know that they're going to keep us thinking about the importance of the parish community and how all of us can lead together. And so I thank you all for joining us, and hope that you'll regroup with us next month. And until then, a blessed Lent and Triduum. Take care. God bless.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nick.